Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 23, the Book of Splendour, its content and divisions. Book 5, the Written Word of Kabbalism, second period from the Doctrine and Literature of the Kabalah by Arthur Edward Waite. Book 5, the Written Word of Kabbalism, second period. Argument. The divisions of the Zohar are set forth in successive sections so as to furnish a clear and comprehensive notion of the materials incorporated by this composite work. Its doctrinal content is established by means of copious quotations selected with special reference to its importance from an occult standpoint. 1. The Book of Splendour, its content and divisions. The cycle of the Sepher Yetzirah lies within a manageable compass, and its most important dependencies are all available to the student by means of Latin translations. The Sepher Ha Zohar, on the other hand, is large in itself. It has considerable supplementary matter belonging to a later period and an extensive connected literature. It has not been translated into Latin nor into any European language. The consequence, especially to esoteric students, has been very unfortunate. Great confusion has obtained in regard, firstly, to the content of the work, and secondly, to the comparative importance of its various divisions. Part of this must be undoubtedly attributed to the ambitious design of Rosenroth's great collection. The Kabalah denudata, by attempting to cover much too wide a field, gives no adequate idea of the work which it is meant to elucidate. It attributes an exaggerated, though not inexcusable, importance to 3 tracts introduced into the body of the Zohar, and to late commentary on these. The apparatus in the form of a lexicon which fills most of the first volume, though it has a methodical appearance, is little more than a chaos, in which late and early expositors are bundled together after the uncritical manner of the period. In a later section, undue prominence is given to some personal discussions and correspondence between the editor and Henry More, the English Platonist. Finally, the second volume includes an enormous treatise on the doctrine of the revolutions of souls by a Kabalist of the 17th century. With all its defects, the Kabalah denudata remains of real value, but it would have been beyond all price had a clearer genius governed its arrangement. As it is, the class of persons who are most concerned with the subject have been content to follow the lead of Rosenroth and to accept a little tract known as the Book of Concealment as the fundamental part of the whole Zohar, and the developments of that tract as entitled to the next highest consideration. There are, of course, many sources of information, for the most part not of an occult kind, by which this false impression might have been corrected: the work of Frank in France and that of Ginsberg in England, to name 2 only, but it has endured notwithstanding, and the latest instance is found in the latest work published by Dr. Papus. There, the bibliographical appendix states that the only complete translation of the Zohar is that of M.H. Chateau, whereas the enterprise in question is confined only to the tracts rendered into Latin by Rosenroth, and these have been available for years in the English version of Mathers. The Book of Occultation and its Zoharistic commentaries are only accidents of the Zohar, and they furnish no real notion of the scope of that work. I should add that from the occult standpoint, the Zohar itself is only an accident of the Kabalah, an accident in the life of the alleged tradition, much as, from the standpoint of Latin Christianity, the New Testament is not the exclusive foundation of the Church, but an event in her development. The Zohar proper, as I have stated in my preface, purports to be a commentary on the Pentateuch, and to indicate its general scope, I shall deserve well of my readers if I depart from my general rule of confining quotations from modern authors to footnotes and summarize the admirable observations of Ginsberg. The Zohar does not apparently propound a regular cabalistic system, but dilates upon the diverse doctrines of this theosophy, as indicated in the forms and ornaments of the Hebrew alphabet, in the vowel points and accents, in the divine names and the letters of which they are composed, in the narratives of the Bible, and in the traditional and national stories. The long conversations between its author, R. Simeon ben Yochai, and Moses, which it records, the short and pathetic prayers inserted therein, the religious anecdotes, the attractive spiritual explanation of scripture passages, appealing to the hearts and wants of men, the descriptions of the deity and the Sephiroth, under the tender forms of human relationship, comprehensible to the finite mind, such as father, mother, primeval man, matron, bride, whitehead, the great and small face, the luminous mirror, the higher heaven, the higher earth, etc., which it gives on every page, made the Zohar a welcome textbook for the students of the Kabalah who, by its vivid descriptions of divine love, could lose themselves in rapturous embraces with the deity. We are placed by this quotation in a position to understand, firstly, after what manner the literature of Kabbalism affected the fervid imagination of the Jew and the kind of influence which it had on him, well illustrated in the fascinating and terrible histories of Messianic enthusiasm and illusion, as already noted. We can understand, secondly, how much there is to correct in the occult theory which has fixed upon the Zohar as embodying the traditional knowledge of a religion behind all religions. No system responds less readily to what is involved in such a conception. No person could be less disposed than the occultist to accept the full cabalistic notion of religion, were he really acquainted therewith. The philosophical doctrines which I have sketched in the early sections of the previous book do certainly connect superficially with occult philosophy, which itself seems to connect magnetically with everything that is unsound in faith and unreasonable in doctrine. The connection in the present instance can only show that neither is of serious account in the last analysis. That God is immanent in the material world is a much simpler and more rational hypothesis than to establish intermediaries between finite and infinite, which create innumerable difficulties without resolving any. Far more truly philosophical is the doctrine of the countenances, which I have described already as the chief glory of Kabbalism. But so far as all effect is concerned, it has passed away, like the Shekinah from the holy place. At the present day, we have other and better means of excusing the anthropomorphisms of the Bible, and for the rest, no attempt to excuse them has any connection, approximate or remote, with the ground which occult philosophy assumes to cover. The Zohar is divided by Rosenroth after a somewhat artificial manner into internal and external parts. 1. The internal parts are those which are combined together in one scheme. They are A. The text of the Zohar, properly so called. Apart from all its additions, this is not of unmanageable dimensions. B. The Sepher Yetzirah, or Book of Concealment. C. The Idra Kabbah, or Greater Synod. D. The Idra Jizuta, or Lesser Synod. E. Sabah di Mishpatim, the discourse or story of the Ancient One in section Mishpatim. F. Midrash Ruth, or commentary on the scriptural book of that name. There are fragments only. G. Sepher Ha Zohar, the renowned or illustrious book, sometimes called Book of Brightness. H. Toseftoth, addenda or additions. I. Raya Mehenma, or the Faithful Shepherd. J. Hycloth, that is palaces, mansions, or abodes. K. Sithrai Thora, or mysteries of the Thora, that is the law. L. Midrash Hanelim, or the secret commentary. M. Rez Derazin, or secret of secrets. From this account are omitted the following tracts and fragments on the ground that they do not appear in the Mantua edition of circa 1558 known as the Little Zohar. A. Midrash Hazith, or commentary on the Song of Solomon. B. Pekudah, or explanation of the Thora. C. Yanuka, or the discourse of the youth. D. Mama Tahasi, or the discourse beginning Come and See. E. Hibura Kadmad, or primary assembly. F. Mathanethan, or traditional receptions. The ground on which these portions are set aside appears insufficient, as the sections E, F, G, J, and M in the first tabulation are also wanting in the Mantua edition. The Great Zohar, the Cremona edition, 1558 through 1560, contains all the treatises enumerated in both the above lists. I'm not aware that any superior authority resides in the Mantua Zohar. 2. As understood by Rosenroth, the external parts are those superadded to the earlier editions. These are A. Tikkunim A. Zohar, or supplements of the Book of Splendour, called also the Ancient Supplements, to distinguish them from further and later editions. B. Zohar Chadash, the new Zohar containing matters omitted in the printed editions. This has 4 parts. 1. The text of the Zohar itself, scattered through which is the supplement of the tract Midrash Hanelim, part of which appears in the original work. 2. Tikkunim Chadashim, or new supplements. 3. Zohar Shir Hashirim, or exposition of the Canticle of Canticles appertaining to the Zohar. 4. Zohar Aki, or exposition of lamentations appertaining to the Zohar. In the above tabulations are contained everything of the Zohar that has come down to us. It will be unnecessary to say that its authenticity did not increase with its bulk. For the better comprehension of the cycle, Rosenroth recommends A. Sefer Deruk Ameth, that is the way of truth, being various readings in the Zohar arranged according to the Mantuan edition. B. Bina Amri, or words of understanding, being an elucidation of difficulties in the Zoharistic vocabulary. C. Zohar Chamar, or Splendors of the Sun, being a short commentary which follows the Mantua edition. D. Pardes Rimonim, or Garden of Pomegranates by R. Moses of Cordova, an explanation of numerous texts in the Zohar and Tikkunim. E. Mekar Chokmah, or Fount of Wisdom, forming a continuation or new part of the Way of Truth. F. Mara Cohen, or The Vision of the Priest, a synoptic work, the greater part of which appears in the Kabalah Den Miata, Volume 2, Part 1. G. Zar Zahab, or A Crown of Gold, used largely in the apparatus of Rosenroth. H. Patak Einiton, or Gate of the Eyes, for the biblical quotations in the Zohar and Tikkunim. Rosenroth also highly recommends and largely reproduces the vast manuscript treatises of Isaac de Loria, compiled by R. Chaim Vital, and further acknowledges his indebtedness to two other unprinted works, a cabalistic commentary on the whole law and a treatise entitled Chest Abraham. The Zohar proper, the conversations of Simeon ben Yoshai with the prophets by whom he was visited, with the disciples by whom he was surrounded, and of these, as we have seen, with each other, is not a work that is to be judged by the same standard as the purely allegorical portions which have been incorporated therewith, and to which Christian students of Kabbalism have given so much prominence. It is, in the first place, far more natural and comprehensible, less distorted by monstrous symbolism, having occasionally a touch of nature to indicate its kinship with humanity, and condescending even at times to a Rabelaisian episode. Finally, it does not betray much trace of that inner meaning which is loosely supposed of its entire content, for the most part, by those who would and do likewise discern a latent transcendentalism in pantagruelism. To determine whether the work as a whole is important from the standpoint of modern occultism, I shall now give a short synopsis of its doctrine on several vital questions of religion and philosophy. We have seen that in a certain manner, somewhat occasional and informal, it is a commentary on the Pentateuch, and it is understood and passed over that it is a forced, arbitrary commentary, which has nothing in harmony with the simple sense of Scripture. It would serve no purpose to enlarge upon this fact, which applies to all Kabbalistic exegesis. The governing principle of its interpretation or treatment is the existence of several senses in the written word. These are differently enumerated, and there seems no reason why they should not be extended indefinitely, but they are reducible broadly under three heads, which are compared by the Zohar to the garment, the body which is within it, and the soul which is within the body. There are those unwise, it says, who behold how a man is vested in a comely garment, but see no farther and take the garment for the body, whereas there is something more precious than either, namely the soul. The law has also its body. Some of the commandments may be called the body of the law, and the ordinary recitals mingled therein are the garments which clothe this body. Simple folk observe only these garments, that is, the narrations of the law, perceiving not that which they hide. Others, more instructed, do not give heed to the vestment, but to the body which it covers. And there are the wise, the servants of the great king, who dwell on the heights of Sinai, and concern themselves only with the soul, which is the foundation of all, and the true law. These shall be ready in the coming time to contemplate the soul of that soul which breathes in the law. This passage illustrates what I mean by the added depth and significance which the Kabalah reads into the Bible, and it is, I think, also an instance of the intellectual humility of the great rabbins of the exile, who confessed to a sense in Scripture which exceeded their loving penetration, so that after all subtleties of exegesis, all the symposiums of synods, the word of God issued in a mystery, and the key of this mystery was the reward of the just and wise man in the world to come. The necessity of the manifold sense followed from the insufficiency of the letter. Simple recitals and common words suggested only the human lawgiver. If those only were the sum of the Torah, it would be possible to equal, perhaps even to excel it. Moreover, the sayings of Esau, Hagar, Laban, of Balaam and Balaam's ass could not be the law of truth, the perfect law, the faithful witness of God. and hence the transcendental meaning in which was the true law was supposed to save Israel from skepticism, and it postponed rationalistic criticism for some centuries. It led, of course, into extravagance. The second sense became in its turn inadequate, and one more concealed was inferred. So also, besides a general latent meaning, there was that more particular triple significance attributed to each several word. As the possibilities suggested by such a method are infinite, it is unnecessary to say that these senses were never methodized, or that the Zohar does not unfold in a consecutive form either the allegorical or mystical meaning. It gives glimpses only, and it may be in this sense that the original Zohar is said to have been a camel's load. That original was a latency in the minds of cabalistic rabbins, but it was never written with pen. As the Zohar establishes the necessity of the concealed meaning on the insufficiency of the outward, and as the sense of such insufficiency is indubitably a late event in the history of sacred documents, we have full evidence for deciding the value of the claim which it elsewhere makes to a high antiquity for its interpretation. Had the Jew never come in contact with culture outside Judea, he would never have conceived the tradition. And the kind of culture which helped him to the sense of insufficiency is not to be looked for in Egypt or in Babylon, but in the Hellenized thought of Rome. Having established the general principle of Zoharic exegesis, let us see next the kind of light which it cast upon the letter of Scripture, and in the first place, upon the creation of man. We know that according to Genesis, he was made of the dust of the earth, that the breath of life passed over him, and that he became a living soul. The Zohar is able to tell us what transpired before this event. When it entered into the will of the Holy One to create man, he called before him many hosts of the superior angels and said unto them, "It is my will to create man." They answered him, "Man will not continue one night in his dignity." Then the Holy One extended his finger and burned them. Thereafter he summoned other hosts into his presence, saying unto them, "It is my will to create man." They answered, "What is man that thou rememberest him?" He said unto them, "But this man shall be in our image, so that his wisdom shall be greater than your wisdom." When Elohim had created man, when man had fallen into sin, going forth as one guilty, there came Uzzah and Azael, saying to the Holy One, "We have an accusation against thee. Behold this son of man whom thou hast made, how he hath sinned before thee." He answered them, "If ye had been in like case, ye would have done worse than he has. What then did the Holy One? He cast them down from their sacred station, even from heaven." It must be confessed that this ridiculous fable has neither an inward sense nor an outward light. We know that Latin Christianity has a legend of the fall of the angels, which connects that event in some misty manner with the scheme of redemption. It is sufficiently childish, but it speaks with the tongue of seraphs in comparison with this history, in which the superior good sense of the hierarchy is punished by burning and expulsion. There are, of course, many other passages in the Zohar which are explanatory of the creation of man. The breath of life is said to be the holy soul which has its origin from the life divine, and thus man started on his mundane course with a sanctified natural life, nephesh, communicated from the heavenly chaya, and in this connection there is a suggestive and beautiful thought. So long as that holy soul communicates with the Son of Man, he is the well-beloved of his Master. How many keepers watch and encompass him on all sides? He is the symbol of goodness both above and below, and the holy Shekinah rests upon him. But when he turns aside from this path, the Shekinah abandons him. The holy soul has no longer any intercourse with him, and from the side of the mighty evil spirit Samael there is put in action a spirit which goes up and down in the world, resting only in those places from which sanctity has withdrawn, and thus the child of man is corrupted. We learn also that the throne of glory had 6 steps, and man was created on the 6th day because he is worthy to sit on this throne. There are again obscure references to the original physical condition of humanity. Adam and Eve were created side by side, not face to face. That is, seemingly there was not a desire of the female towards the male. It does not, however, appear that the awakening of this desire was the real cause of the lapse from perfection, a notion quite discordant with rabbinical views upon the sanctity and symbolism of sexual intercourse. The Kabalah and the mysticism which led up to it offer a very high ideal of the nuptial state. It is true that in the fragments of the Bahir, the sin of Eve is presented as sexual, but if this is to be understood literally, it was one of monstrous intercourse. According to Maimonides, however, the serpent represented the imaginative faculty. Enough has been quoted to show that there is a curious theosophic law in the Zohar concerning the creation of man, but there is nothing of any real occult significance. It is suggestive occasionally with the suggestion that is never wanting in fable and mythos, and it is most interesting within its own sphere, which is that of mythology and not certainly of mystic religion. We may take the inquiry a step further and ascertain what the Zohar teaches concerning the state of Adam prior to his fall. We are told that he was clothed in the garment of the upper splendor, for which Jehovah Elohim afterwards substituted the garment of skin, thus indicating that the fall was followed by a change of physical condition. There is no need to mention that this legend prevailed in many Eastern mythologies. It is not, on the one hand, the special inheritance of the Kabalah, nor can the latter show that it really came by it through an oral succession from early times. As often happens in the Zohar, there is a poetical inference from the fable which is better than the fable itself. The good deeds which the Son of Man accomplishes in this world draw from the light of glory above, and he prepares for himself a garment against the day when he shall enter that world and appear before the Holy Blessed One. The fall of man in the Zohar, as in its connections, insists upon the fact that it was the serpent Samael who brought death into the world. But this serpent is to some extent allegorical, and the lapse was a lapse of the soul by the desire of the things below it. The death seems to be spiritual, for it is said that the serpent takes away the higher souls, neshameth, of all flesh. The tree of the trespass was banished from paradise, which sounds fantastic, but the tree is allegorical and moves with man through his pilgrimage. Adam also was the cause of the eternal banishment of his descendants. In dealing with other sections of the Zohar, we shall have occasion to refer again to the mythos of the fall, and shall observe that it is further involved by the introduction of monstrous elements. If we turn now to the mystery of original sin, we shall find that it is intensified rather than explained. In Psalm 91:11 it is said, "He shall give his angels charge over thee to keep thee in all thy ways," which passage the New Testament applies in a special manner to Christ. The Zohar explains it as follows: "When man comes into the world, there appears in him at that moment the evil spirit which always arraigns him. This evil spirit never forsakes man from the day that he is born into the world. But the good spirit comes to the man from the day that he is made clean." When does a man become clean? At the age of 13 years. Then he joins himself with both spirits, one on the right hand and one on the left, even the good to the right and the evil to the left. And these are the two spirits which are appointed ever to remain by man. If he strive after perfection, the evil spirit is restrained, so that the right rules the left, and then both unite to secure him in all his ways. It follows from this statement that the child is delivered over to iniquity in an especial manner, as it does not receive the good angel until it reaches the age of puberty. Closely connected with the doctrines of the fall of man and original sin is that of the Messiah, who, for Jew and Christian alike, is a deliverer and an atonement. And much that we find in the Zohar recalls a host of Talmudic speculations on the same subject. In common with all souls, that of the Messiah is pre-existent. It was the spirit of the King Messiah which brooded over the waters at the creation. He governs both above and below, gladdening the heart of Israel, but a judgment on idolatrous nations. When the souls in the Garden of Eden behold the just suffering for their master, they return and inform the Messiah. When they inform him of the afflictions of Israel in exile, and of sinners in Israel who reflect not that they may know their Lord, he lifts up his voice and weeps, as it is written, "He was wounded for our transgressions," Isaiah 53:5. We read again of a palace of wicked children in the Garden of Eden, to which the Messiah repairs, and there invokes upon himself all the tribulations of Israel. If he had not thus taken upon himself the punishments for the transgressions of the law, no man would be able to endure them. More curious and more significant is the passage which follows immediately. Whilst the children of Israel abode in the Holy Land, they averted from the world all pain and suffering, in the sense of punishment for trespass by their prayers, worship and sacrifice, but now this is performed by the Messiah. yet so long only as man remains in the world, for he must receive his retribution afterwards. As it does not appear that Jews or Gentiles really escape the consequences of their misdeeds, this notion of vicarious atonement is quite of the fantastic order. Elsewhere, however, it is said that the righteous are the sacrifice and the atonement of the world. We must remember that the Zohar is a medley, and that medleys are not in correspondence at all points. I must be content to refer briefly to a very long passage which has been the subject of much controversy as to the date of the Zohar, and is concerned with the appearance of the Messiah. It will be a time of woe and salvation and of special affliction for Israel, but he who is persistent in the faith shall attain the joy of the King. After this tribulation, further distress shall follow from the combination of nations and kings, and then a pillar of fire extending from heaven to earth shall become visible to all men, at which time the Messiah shall come forth from the Garden of Eden and appear in Galilee, which was the first province to suffer destruction in the Holy Land, and is the first, therefore, in which he must reveal himself. Thence he shall stir up war against the whole world. There will be many signs in the heavens, stars warring against the star of the east, after which the Messiah will be invisible for 12 months, and at the expiration of that period will be taken up into heaven to receive the crown of the kingdom. He will again reveal himself and wage war against the whole world, etc. It is idle to suppose that such a messianic doctrine, or, speaking generally, the scheme of cabalistic scriptural interpretation, can have the slightest occult importance. It is essentially a Jewish scheme, supposing the exclusive claim of Jewry to the divine election, and the last source to which we can look for confirmation of the romantic notion that a transcendental doctrine of absolute religion has been perpetuated from the far past. Understood as it actually is, a thesaurus of Jewish theosophy, Jewish visionary doctrines, Jewish yearning and aspirations, which, because Jewry is part of humanity, is in contact at 1,000 points with the aspiration and yearning of the whole heart of the world. It is a priceless memorial, but it loses all its significance in the attempt to misplace it. Because it is theosophical, although Jewish, it has, of course, its points of connection with other occult systems, and not infrequently with matters which are beyond the range of that which is understood by occultism, in a word, with the things of mysticism, as, for example, in its transcendental speculations on the identity of subject and object in God, and perhaps even in the mystic experience of the soul. It enters a good deal into that strange doctrine of correspondences which we meet everywhere in the domain which is embraced in the higher understanding of the term magic. It might be described indeed as the extended mystery of correspondence. Whatsoever is found on earth, says the Zohar, has its spiritual counterpart on high and is dependent on it. When the inferior part is influenced, that which is set over it in the upper world is also affected, because all are united. From this doctrine, the art of talismanic magic is the first logical consequence. Elsewhere it is said, "That which is above is in the likeness of that which is below, and the likeness of that which is below is in the sea regarded as the mirror of the inferior heaven, but all is one." This is, of course, identical with the pseudo-hermetic maxim, "Quod superius est sicut quod inferens et quod inferius est sicut quod superius," etc., which may even have been formulated along the lines of the Zohar. The peculiar philosophical system of the Kabalah, of course, receives a very full development in its chief literary memorial, but we are sufficiently acquainted with the heads of this system to make extensive quotation superfluous. The primordial manifestation of the unknown God was the production of a luminous point, which is Kether, and it seems certain that hereby the Zohar understands the ego, for it says expressly that this was the light which Elohim created before everything. The nucleus of the luminous point is thought, which is the beginning of all things. In its union with the spirit it is called Bina, and the diffusion of this spirit brings forth a voice, which in turn produces the word, for the Zohar is a philosophy of the word. In this thought, the forms of all things were evolved. The light of the divine consciousness is therefore the first matter of the manifested universe. When Elohim willed to make the world, he produced a concealed light from which all the manifested lights were afterwards radiated, thus forming the superior world, or Atziluth, from which the other worlds were subsequently emanated. It is said also, as we have elsewhere seen, that In the beginning was the will of the king, prior to any existence which came into being through emanation from this will. With this will is connected the notion of thought as the principle of all things, but unrealized in the primordial condition and contained within itself. The expansion of thought produces spirit, which next assumes the title of intelligence, in which state the thought is no longer self-centered. The spirit, in the course of its development, produces a voice or word, but the thought, the understanding, and the word are one alone, while the thought itself is bound up with Ein Sof and is never separated therefrom. This is the significance of the scriptural statement that Jehovah is one and his name is one. Among the most suggestive and also the most recurrent teachings is the importance and universality of man in the scheme of things. For the Zohar, as for the poet, the world is a disguised humanity, and all that interests a man is man. It was the form of celestial man that God assumed at the beginning of his manifestation. This is the Shekinah, this the Merkabah or chariot, and this also is the sacred name of Jehovah. The form of man comprises all that is in heaven or on earth, and prior to its manifestation, no form could subsist. It is the perfection of faith in all things and the absolute form of all. It is the summary and the most exalted term of creation. As soon as man appeared, all was completed, both of the world above and the world below. Even those physical parts which he puts aside ultimately are conformed to the secrets of the supreme wisdom. So also in his threefold nature he is a faithful image of that which passes on high, and the souls of the just are above all the powers and all the servitors that are on high. There is even a certain withdrawn and inconceivable sense in which man, through sephirotic mediation, brings the latens deitas into manifestation. And as all things exist and subsist for man, so the problem of evil in the universe is solved in his interest, as it is the condition of his development, while with a Catholic comprehensiveness which has no parallel in any sacred literature, the scheme of human existence is regarded by the Zohar with an optimism strange in its profundity, from man's pre-existence in the archetypal world to the beatific vision, the absorption, and the eternal nuptials which await him. The pneumatology of the Zohar is more fully developed in the connections of that work than in the commentary proper. The spiritual man is the highest degree of creation. In him it was completed and he comprises everything. The soul originates in the supreme intelligence. At the time when the Holy Blessed One desired to create the world, he formed all the souls which should be given afterwards to the children of men. It is also stated expressly that the soul enters the body when her time has come with protestations, grief, and unwillingness. It is equally clear that it acquires nothing by the experience unless it be the dignity of an ordeal which has been withstood successfully. For all that souls learn in this world they knew already before they came into the world, which follows from the Talmudic doctrine that they were acquainted with the whole Torah. Their proper end is the return into deity, but there are various abiding places and destinies for the higher spiritual principles, and even in this life they may depart from an unclean person. It may be added that souls are created in pairs, but these pairs do not invariably come at the same time into the world. In the excerpts which have been now given, the Zohar appears at its best, but I may observe in conclusion that, again after the manner of a medley, it combines with things precious others that are of little value, and not a few that are indescribably foolish. There are, for example, gross absurdities in the pneumatological portions. When the soul enters the body of the infant, it cannot find room and has to await the growth of its envelope in considerable discomfort. Points of this kind might be multiplied indefinitely. They extend to all departments of the doctrine and obtain especially concerning the resurrection of the dead, which according to the Zohar, as there is no need to say, is the restitution of the physical body together with its proper soul. As this resurrection can take place only in Palestine, the bones of Israel in exile will be transported thither. It may be added that the Zohar took the Sepher Yetzirah into its heart of hearts, dwelt upon it, extended, magnified, almost transformed its symbolism. The Hebrew letters which figure in the earlier tract as the instruments of creation are for it the ciphers or vestures of the written law, the expression of the Torah, and the Torah is the archetype of all the world. Whether or not we are able to agree with Frank that the Sepher Yetzirah ends where the Zohar commences, and that they are the exact complements of each other, it is certain that the instinct of the early students who singled the Book of Formation from the rest of the pre-Zoharic Midrashim was not at fault in regarding it as the head and source of Kabbalism. But in conclusion, as there was an occultism and mysticism in Israel prior to the Sepher Raziel and to the Zohar, so both were incorporated in the latter. Both in the process underwent a species of transmutation, and as I venture to think the process, like that sea change of the poet, produced something more strange and rich. There are at least flights of mystic thought and aspiration in this great book of Theosophy which are unknown to Gabriel and Ibn Ezra, and are more direct and strong in their appeal to the inner consciousness of man in this dawn of the 20th century than in the famous commentary of Azariel or in the school of Isaac the Blind. And to confess this is to confess out of hand that the Zohar has still a message for the mystic. Perhaps all that is of value therein would be contained within a few leaves, but as said of the choicest poems of Coleridge, it should be bound in pure gold. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment, and if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.